The first proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God in the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does not exist. Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the affirmative, and Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the negative of this proposition. The second proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does exist. Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the affirmative, and Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the negative of this proposition. This production was directed and videotaped by Dr. Rex A. Turner, Jr. and by Dr. Curtis A. Cates, administrators and professors of the Alabama Christian School of Religion, Montgomery, Alabama. This film has been copyrighted and reproduced by the National Christian Press, Incorporated. Any reproductions, use, or sale of this film without written permission from the authorized representative of the National Christian Press is strictly prohibited.
Although some are still arriving, it's time for us to begin the proceedings. The moment that we've been working toward with great anticipation and excitement has arrived. It gives us great pleasure to welcome both Dr. Warren and Dr. Matson to the Tampa Bay area for this debate, and at the same time to extend a very cordial welcome to those of you from both near and far who have come to attend the debate. There's some that we want to pay special recognition to this evening by way of appreciation. This being the first night, may I take just a moment of your time to do that. The elders of the Central Church of Christ in Clearwater, Florida, who are overseeing the debate proceedings. The elders are Jack Trump, Ben Kinzer, and Gordon Methvin. Will you please stand? Working in a very intimate way with these elders has been a debate committee, the chairman of which is Terry Hightower, the treasurer Denver Tracy. The committee members are Harry Box, Chester Smith, and Jackie Steersman. That is me. I ask you men, if you will, to stand. Thank you. Those who made the initial contacts with Dr. Warren and Dr. Matson that begun the proceedings for the debate are Gary Ely and Terry Hightower. Gary, Terry, would you please stand? Two ladies who have been of untold service to the elders and the committee, Ms. Violet Masters, the office secretary for the Central Church of Christ, and Mildred Barrett, coordinator for the clerical work that was done. To the many congregations and individuals who have financially contributed to make this event possible, we are grateful. To the multitudes of individuals who have worked sacrificially behind the scenes in varying and indispensable capacities, these too we are deeply appreciative of your contribution. The proposition for this evening. I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does not exist. Affirming this proposition will be Dr. Wallace I. Matson, Professor of Philosophy at the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Matson is internationally known for his ability and scholarship and his defense of the atheistic position. He received the A.B., the M.A., the Ph.D. degrees from the University of California in Berkeley. He has been visiting lecturer or professor at a number of prestigious universities. This past spring at Cambridge University in England. His writings are known extensively among philosophers and theologians. He has received the following fellowships: the Guggenheim, 1961-62, National Endowment for the Humanities, 1971-72, Humanities Research, 1974, and 1977 and 78, all at Cambridge University. Among the publications of Dr. Matson are The History of Philosophy and The Existence of God, and the latest, Sentience. Dr. Matson, both by training and experience, is as qualified as any we know to uphold the proposition he is affirming tonight. In the negative, the first two nights is Dr. Thomas B. Warren, who is Professor of Philosophy of Religion and Christian Apologetics at the Harding Graduate School of Religion in Memphis, Tennessee. He received his B.S. from Abilene Christian University, the M.A. from the University of Houston, the M.A. and the Ph.D. degree from Vanderbilt University. He has authored more than 20 books, including Have Atheists Proved There Is No God?, The Warren Flew Debate on the Existence of God. He is a member of the American Philosophical and Philosophy of Science Association and the Southwestern Philosophical Society. Dr. Warren is editor of The Spiritual Sword, a staff writer for the Gospel Advocate, and regular speaker on the radio program 5 Gospel Minutes. He serves as minister of the Brownsville Road Church of Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. We know of no one by training and experience who is better qualified to deny the proposition affirmed by Dr. Matson than is Dr. Warren. By way of format for the proceedings, each disputant will have 3 20-minute speeches each evening to be delivered alternately, with the affirmative speaker speaking first each evening. Each speaker will also have a 5-minute speech following the final negative each evening. It will be the obligation of the affirmative speaker to set forth evidence that warrants the conclusion which he has affirmed. For Dr. Matson, tonight and tomorrow night, the burden of proof rests on his shoulders. He must present evidence that warrants the conclusion that I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does not exist. It will be the obligation of the negative speaker each evening to give careful attention to the evidence which has been presented, to evaluate that evidence in the light of the proposition being affirmed, and to show that the proposition is not sustained. According to an agreement signed between the two disputants before the debate, each disputant has the privilege, not obligation, of asking in writing as many as 10 questions of his opponent. These questions, if used, are to be given to the respective opponent no later than 35 minutes before the beginning each evening. The person being questioned is then to answer the question in writing and return them no later than 15 minutes before the beginning speech. May I say that I hope that the audience will recognize that even though the speeches debate have not begun before 7:30, there is work being done at least 35 minutes before the proceedings. I hope that you will recognize this. While every one of us would like to meet the men who are participating, would like to greet them and to know them better, we do respect their privacy as they're preparing for the evening's occasion. There will be an intermission after the third 20-minute speech each evening, 5 minutes. Assisting Dr. Warren as moderators will be Robert Camp and Roy Deaver. Assisting Dr. Matson will be David Raleigh. The audience needs to pay careful attention to what I'm saying now. Due to the fact that the debate is copyrighted, no private tape recording is permitted. Should you desire either tapes or the debate book, please obtain an order form which is available. You'll find these up here on the stand. You'll also be able to obtain them from our ushers and perhaps at the doorways as you enter or as you exit. Should either table call a point of order during the debate proceedings, this is in no way indicates that either party is angry. We should not become excited about it. The participants merely following the previously arranged guidelines which are standard for orderly public debate. Let us also remember the distinction between auditors and participants. Dr. Matson and Dr. Warren are the participants. We, the audience, are the auditors. Hand clapping and all audible reactions of any kind are strongly discouraged. We want each evening's activity to be clearly orderly, decent, and characterized by the dignity and the seriousness befitting the subject under discussion. There has been arrangement made for a nursery in the Florida room. It is not attended, but you can take your children there if you need. There is a speaker there, and you can hear the proceedings from that room. Since Dr. Matson is in the affirmative this evening, we're now turning the floor to Dr. Matson.
Thank you, Mr. Steersman. Before I begin, I'd also like to thank Dr. Warren and the Church of Christ who arranged this debate. I don't know the Bible as well as I should, but it seems to me that St. Paul does say somewhere, test your faith. I'm sure he says hold fast to it. Maybe he says both. But anyway, it certainly is admirable of the Church of Christ that they not only tolerate challenges, but even go out of their way to import the challenger from far away and at enormous expense. I'm particularly conscious of the honor that's been done me in inviting me to sit in the hot seat that has been previously occupied by my distinguished English friend and brother in atheism, Anthony Flew. Before I get down to nitty-gritty, though, there are a few matters I need to say something about or ask about. One of them really is, what is the purpose of this debate? I asked Dr. Warren what he considered to be the principal purpose or purposes of these debates, and I gave him a number of possible choices: enlightenment, strengthening of the faith, moral uplift, entertainment, or other. And he replied as follows: enlightenment, yes. Strengthening of the faith, well, he crossed out faith and put in faithful and said yes. Moral uplift, yes. And then also he wrote in, to prove that God exists and to stress the significance of this fact. But for entertainment, he put in capital letters an exclamation point, no. Well, I at least hope that besides all these other things that are checked, there might be just a little bit of entertainment about this if you're going to come out 4 nights for it. I'm certainly not a wrestler or a stand-up comedian, but I see nothing wrong with enjoyment. And if theological disputes are not commonly thought of as showbiz, well, it was not always so. Until fairly recently, they were a standard sideshow of coronations, royal weddings, victory celebrations, and all that sort of thing. Though in Spain, they went in for stronger stuff. They substituted the public burning of heretics. Now, we might, for all I know, be in for a revival of this. At any rate, the house here tonight is fantastic. At least I should think so for an affair of this sort, at least where I come from, but I'm very much conscious of being in another part of the world. I doubt, though, whether it will ever replace Monday Night Football. Well, so much for entertainment, which is a trivial matter, I suppose. The question before us is, does God, in particular specified God, exist? I doubt whether that's really a question like, does life exist on Mars? If we were debating that, I suppose people would come and present evidence on one side and evidence on the other side. And in the audience, there would be people who hadn't made up their minds, who came to be enlightened on this and wanted to know, didn't know when they came and knew or thought they knew when they went away. I doubt whether very many here are in that kind of situation. I think this question is more emotional. Most people's minds, I guess, are made up on this already, and I doubt very much whether either I or Dr. Warren is going to change very many. And I shall certainly not be disappointed if I don't make any converts, or even if some from my side go away to Dr. Warren. I'm not out to make converts. In fact, I'd be a little embarrassed about it because I must remember that, after all, I might just possibly be wrong, in which case, if I made a convert, I'd be damning him to hell, wouldn't I? I suppose this is more like a football game where you come to cheer your team, but then cheering has been forbidden, so I better leave that aside. Maybe even more closely a wrestling match. And I guess it's a wrestling match, I'm the bad guy and ought to appear in black trunks or something. I didn't have any such, but I wore a black tie, notice, and that'll serve to remind you if you need it. There are little red doohickeys on it, but you shouldn't think of those as suggesting that maybe I've come here to represent the devil. I'm not the devil's advocate. As we shall see very shortly, that title belongs to Dr. Warren. Well, one more matter before we can start off. I have to comment a little bit on the publicity release, part of which was included in Mr. Steersman's very gracious introduction. It says of me, and this is perfectly honest things, honestly intended, but I do have to correct it. It said, quote, I quote from the publicity handout, presently he is the visiting professor in philosophy at Cambridge University, England, end quote. Now, it's true that I am a professor of philosophy, and it's true that when that was written, I was visiting England. But those don't add up to being the visiting professor of philosophy in Cambridge University. I know that none of you here could care less about that, but I have to put that on the record if I ever want to go back to Cambridge University, which I do. All right, now to a somewhat more interesting, I hope, matter. The publicity also speaks of me as, quote, known for his defense of the atheistic position, end quote. I don't say that's false, but I do think it deserves some comment. I wrote a book, which Mr. Steersman also mentioned. It's called The Existence of God, in which I argued that there's no good reason for believing that any God, which I define more or less as a supernatural person in at least partial control of the world. I said, there's no good reason to believe that a God exists, and that there is a very good, indeed a conclusive reason, to believe that no God with a capital G exists. And I define God with a capital G as a person, that is, a being with intellect and will, and the ability to act in accordance with the will. A person who is infinitely or perfectly knowing, powerful, or good. Well, is that atheism? You could call it so if you like. And I suppose that in an ordinary acceptation of the term here, that would be so. But I'd like to take a look at the word atheism. First, it's a Greek word. There are 3 syllables, and each one comes from a separate element in Greek. There's the a, which is just a negative, not or non, and the the, which is from the word theos, meaning God, and then the ist, which is just ist, or maybe it's more English to say er. So, literally, an atheist means non-godder, non-godder. Follow me? Now, whether a given person is or isn't an atheist depends not only on what he believes, but also on where he is and at what time he's there. As readers of Gore Vidal's novel Julian are well aware, this word atheist was the standard term that the pagans of the Greco-Roman world used to apply to Christians. The Christians were non-godders at that time and place. That is, they disbelieved, they utterly rejected Jupiter, Mars, and all those others. And if Dr. Warren and I went to Timbuktu or to India today, we would be atheists together. How many gods have been worshipped altogether in the history of the worship of mankind? I don't know. I don't know of any census. But let's say it's 1 million. The number must be staggering. 1 million is surely a conservative estimate. Well, I reject all of them. So that makes me a millionfold atheist, if you like. But Dr. Warren, I think, rejects 999,999 of them. So the numerical difference turns out to be fairly tiny. It might even be a tie if you count the God of the philosopher Spinoza. Spinoza says an awful lot about God, and I think maybe I acknowledge the God of Spinoza, but I won't press that point. Spinoza, after all, was kicked out of the synagogue and universally execrated as an atheist by all parties. No, I'm not apologizing or rejecting the term atheist, but I do want to get it into context where it belongs. Anyway, we're not here to debate atheism in general. We're here to debate a much more restricted proposition. We are here to debate an admirably clear one. I have agreed to defend the following proposition. You heard it, but permit me to repeat it. Quote, I know that God, parenthesis, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, end parenthesis, does not exist, end quote. Now that's not a proposition to which I paid any attention in my book on the existence of God. And I did not compose that proposition for this debate. I assume that Dr. Warren did. At any rate, I didn't. But I accept it, and I want to commend Dr. Warren, or whoever did compose it, for its definiteness and its orthodoxy. Neither one of these, definiteness or orthodoxy, is very usual in philosophical, theological discussions nowadays, and more is the pity, I think. Very many people who profess to be theists, and even Christians, even priests and ministers, when pressed on what they mean by God, are apt to take refuge in expressions like love, or perhaps William James's, I offer this only as an example, formula, force not ourselves that makes for righteousness. What are you going to do to confront somebody like that? Of course, some human beings love some other human beings, and so on, in some sense. So love exists, and if God is love in that sense, then God exists. So there's nothing to discuss. Whether or not there's a force not ourselves that makes for righteousness is a proposition that's very difficult to make out. And really, I think there's little point in discussing it. If you believe it and I don't, there seems to be very little reason that either of us can give other than just his hunch. But it's different with this. God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell. We know, or I think we know, or I think I know exactly what that proposition means. And it can profitably be discussed. We can bring up things that tend in its favor and against it. Moreover, and here I come to the orthodoxy part of this, moreover, it brings out into the open a subject that defenders of Christianity nowadays almost unanimously seem to want to hush up. Namely, the biblical teaching about hell. Now, this teaching is there in the New Testament, and it's not going to go away. That is, short of a complete rewriting of the Bible, and some things lead me to suspect that perhaps that's not a complete impossibility anymore. But, at least at present, it's there, and Dr. Warren's candor in facing this issue, indeed forcing it on us, is, in my opinion, altogether commendable. That's one reason why I was happy to debate this proposition. Now, let's consider this proposition a little further and start at the beginning with the word no. Because it doesn't only state this God doesn't exist, but also I know that. Now this word know, K-N-O-W, is a word that terrifies, or at least induces acute spasms of nervousness in philosophers, because we are professionally aware of how many awful pitfalls there are lurking around any assertion to really and truly know anything, for sure, with no possibility of being mistaken. Philosophers who throw this word know around and don't use it with proper circumspection and prayer and fasting and so on, but just come out and say, I know this and I know that and so on, are likely to be called dogmatists. And this is a very dirty word indeed in philosophical circles. And all the dangers that go with claiming to know anything are greatly magnified when what is claimed to be known is what the logicians call a universal negative. That is, a proposition of the form, there is no such thing as a so-and-so. How, for instance, would I go about establishing that there's no such thing as a seven-toed warthog? I don't think there is any such thing as a seven-toed warthog. And suppose I was the world's greatest warthog specialist, and I had examined thousands and thousands of warthogs and counted all their toes, and never came across one with 7 toes. Nevertheless, could I be justified in saying that there isn't and never has been and never will be one, not just one? I think you can see why, if I did, I would toss and turn through many a sleepless night. Because no matter what I do, there's always this danger that the next morning my worst enemy among warthogologists is going to come into my lab and unwrap this bundle, and there it is, the 7-toed warthog. All he has to do is come up with one single specimen, and his triumph is complete. It's all over. He doesn't have ever to lose a moment's sleep. He can go on to something else. But the defender of the universal negative, you see how nervous he has got to be, and how unendingly so. So, am I not very foolhardy in agreeing to undertake to defend this universal negative proposition? There is not, never was, and never will be such a thing as the God of the New Testament, etc. I dare say that many of you this very moment are recalling the beginning of Psalm 53. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God, and nodding your heads either outwardly or inwardly. But wait a moment. There is one exception to this difficulty about proving or knowing a universal negative. I'll illustrate this. I know and you know, and there's no least cause for nervousness in saying that we know it, that there is no such thing as a married bachelor or a four-sided triangle. In fact, these are specimens of what I might call lazy man's knowledge. Because what do you have to do to know that there are no married bachelors or four-sided triangles? You don't have to go out into the field, as they say, and conduct laborious investigations, make surveys, have people fill out questionnaires. Are you a bachelor? Checkbox. Are you married? Checkbox. Anything like that, and put it through the IBM machines or anything. Because all you have to know is the English language. Bachelor means unmarried man. So, if someone were a married bachelor, he would be at one and the same time, and in the same respect, both married and unmarried. And this is what logicians call a contradiction, or a self-contradiction. And a contradiction can't be so. Not because God forbids contradictions to be so, or the great law fixed, thou shalt not make a contradiction true, or anything like that. Or because it takes too much effort or expense to make it true, or anything like that. It's just because, for the simple and rather trivial reason, that to say of anything that it has a certain property, and then also say that it doesn't have that very same property, is to say something and then immediately deny it. And so you wind up not having said anything. So much for the married bachelor. The four-sided triangle is a little bit, but I think perhaps importantly in this context, different. The word triangle, to be sure, doesn't mean three-sided figure. It means three-angled figure, as you can easily see. But it's easy for geometricians to prove that anything that has a straight-sided closed figure, at any rate, that has three angles must have three sides, neither more nor less. So, you can fuss with this and niggle with it even further. You can say this has three sides, doesn't directly contradict this has four sides, but if we are granted an additional assumption, we can derive a contradiction. And that additional assumption is one that I think everyone would grant. It's just that whatever has just three sides doesn't have also four sides. Well, thank you. All right, well, I'll go on from there later, fortunately. I'm afraid of running out of things, but I guess I'll be able to go on a little while longer. Thank you very much for your patience.
Moderators, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I must confess that I do not believe I have a great deal to reply to in this first speech. No doubt Dr. Matson will get on to his task with a little more vigor just a little later. And I just want to say very briefly, I'm glad to be here, and I'm thankful for everybody who had a part in it. But I have too much to say to spend much time with going on into that in detail. I'd like to look first of all at chart number 78A3. And Dr. Matson will have access to this projector. We have provided him with acetate material he can draw on and make charts, and it's available to him just as it is to me. I want to show you that Dr. Matson has obligated himself, as he was talking at the very end of his speech, to show, to demonstrate that he knows that God does not exist. Now, I rather suspect that he was in the throes of beginning to tell us that no does not really mean no, but developments along that line shall await a further speech. But at any rate, he has signed the proposition, I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who shall punish some eternally in hell, does not exist. This places him in a prison, I submit to you, from which he cannot escape. I want you to envision him. This is number 78A3. Oh, this is not the one I want. Number 78. Number 78. And then to be followed by number 78A. I want you to envision this as a building with a series of concentric rooms, the walls of which have no doors and no windows. Professor Matson is in the middle of it, right here. This first wall is the wall of the eternality of matter. Now, no one can know that God exists unless he knows that matter is eternal. He cannot get out of that room because he cannot prove that matter is eternal. The next wall is that life has come from non-living matter. I will show you later on that Dr. Matson is involved in a strenuous self-contradiction at that force, and he's already said tonight that one who's involved in self-contradiction holds a false proposition. He is already on record as saying that spontaneous generation occur. If it does not occur, then evolution does not occur, and if evolution does not occur, then atheism is false. Dr. Matson is under obligation to show how to get out of this room, and he cannot do so. There are a number of other things that I will develop during the course of the debate. That would agree to show you the argument set out. If one knows that there is no God, and I'm reading to you the meaning of these symbols, then it's know first that matter is eternal. He must know that life has come from non-living matter without any infinite force, intelligent or powerful force behind it, but merely non-living matter, rocks and dirt, if you will, and so on and on. Dr. Matson must prove that. To more to say about that as time goes on. But I want to turn now to chart number 51A. I will not have time to say a great deal about each one of these, but I do want you to pay special attention to them, for we're talking about matters that are of great importance. The importance of this debate. While I greatly enjoy the preaching of the gospel and the defending of the existence of Almighty God, it is certainly not a matter of entertainment. There is no greater joy in the world than being a Christian of the Lord. But there's a great deal of difference between entertainment and simply enjoying a right relationship with God and with the Lord Jesus Christ. Notice carefully the importance of what we're about. If the atheistic view is true, then during our lives here on earth, we human beings are nothing but organized matter. Everything we are and do is a result of non-living, non-intelligent, non-purposive matter. There is, in the third place, no real objective right or wrong, good or evil. Dr. Matson, in answering the question tonight, has labored very strenuously under the problem he faces at this point, for he does not wish to say that there is merely subject. The one and only argument that he has to prove that God does not exist is the problem of evil. But if it is mere subjective evil, which follows as a clear implication of atheism, then one man's idea is just as good as another, and the truth of the matter is, if atheism implies subjectivism, which it does, and if subjectivism implies a logical contradiction, which it does, then atheism is false. Because if subjectivity implies a logical contradiction, then subjectivity is false. And if atheism implies subjectivity and subjectivity is false, that means that it simply is on the basis of feeling of each person. There is no objective reference, then atheism is false. If it is true, no one has any real obligation to do or not to do anything. Neither the Nazis nor the communists have really done anything wrong. Everything is permitted. There have been atheists who have faced up to the fact that apparently Dr. Matson is not going to be willing to face up to, that if atheism is true, if indeed there is no God, then everything, from stomping a child's head, from killing anybody you wish, to whatever kind of heinous crime you may envision. On the other hand, and in the next place, physical death is the end of us. Our total being goes to dust at death. There will be no accounting, no matter what we do with our lives on earth. Our lives on earth are of no significance whatever. But on the other hand, if the theistic view is true, then our Creator is God. There is an objective reference by which to measure or evaluate human behavior, and each of us will live on as a unique center of personality after earthly life is over. And each of us must give an account to God for how he has lived during earthly life. Look and see crucial things to do in this debate. Jackie Steersman has already pointed out that the affirmative speaker has the obligation of proving his case. It is not my job presently to prove that I know that God exists. It is my responsibility to listen to Dr. Matson and see what he presents, to see if he can show that he knows that God does not exist. God is the fundamental, crucial problem which faces each and every human being. This is 51B, I'm sorry. The obligation of the affirmative speaker and the negative speaker. The affirmative speaker has the obligation of the burden of proving his own affirmative. He must present an argument. It must be a valid argument, and it must have true premises. This is what you must look for. And this is not a thing that's strange to Dr. Matson. He knows all about this kind of thing. Therefore, we will be looking for this argument. And then he must reply to negative material. he must clearly define his terms. When in the negative, we are to reply to the affirmative material and to present counter or negative material, which I shall do in these 2 nights. As to general matters, to call attention to any unsound arguments used by opponent, to call attention to self-contradictions, to absurdities, inconsistencies, and failures of responsibility, and so on. Now, chart number 51D. I want to raise the question with Dr. Matson. Is he going to be an atheist or an agnostic? In reading his book before this debate, I thought, well, he surely must be an agnostic. But then, lo and behold, he signed the proposition, I know that God does not exist. Now, Dr. Anthony Flew, in a spirit of honesty at one point in our discussion in Denton, Texas, about 2 years ago, said, I confess that I have a great deal of difficulty at this point. But so long as one is having difficulty at this point, if he has not decided whether he is an atheist or an agnostic, I do not see how he can sign the proposition, I know that God does not exist. Dr. Matson, you are faced with the possibility or with the dilemma of either rejecting your book, which is a part of a series published by Cornell University Press, or the proposition which you have espoused in this debate. Which one will it be? Now, what I must do in order to prove his proposition is false, chart number 70A. Dr. Matson must know in order to prove that his proposition is true. I have suggested that very briefly with the reference to the atheist prison. His proposition and the total position which it involves him in self-contradiction. If I show that there are some things he must know, that he absolutely must know, but cannot know, then he cannot prove his proposition. If I show the proposition involves him in self-contradiction, as he has already admitted even here tonight, then his proposition is false. If I can show his proposition involves or implies a logical contradiction, then it's false. If I show his proposition involves him in the denial of major undisputed facts, I show that his proposition is false. If I show his efforts to defend his basic position involve him, at least by implication, in admissions of defeat, I have shown his proposition false. Or if his proposition involves him in the espousal of absurdities, or if his argument is unsound. So now let us proceed to admissions of defeat by Dr. Matson already before this debate began. Let us look at chart number 4A. We'll have 4A, 4H, 4L, and 4M in that order. A, the atheist's admissions of defeat in regard to his proposition. Now notice carefully. All of these statements from his book, The Existence of God, relate very strongly to the proposition which he has signed in this debate. This statement from pages 118 and 119, a creation out of nothing by the infinite being, if you like, is a hypothesis that cannot be ruled out by the physical evidence presently available. In other words, there is a clear admission that for all he knows, God may exist. Now, Dr. Matson, you can just as well give up. The debate is over. You have admitted, unless you are willing to say to Cornell University Press that the book you have published is simply not doing the job that it has claimed to do. Secondly, then Pasteur showed conclusively that there is no such thing as spontaneous generation. All living things are generated from seed. In other words, there has never been a case where life came from that which had no life. But given atheism, you have to start, if indeed you're going to start at all, with non-living matter. But you've got to get life in the picture because life is here now. But here he admits that there is never any life without seed. This is clearly an admission of defeat. Third, he, the writer, freely admits and insists on the possibility that he may have overlooked the telling bit of evidence, the absolutely conclusive argument, somewhere in the line. Some logical howler may have been committed that invalidates everything. In other words, he's saying, after having written all of this, it's just possible that I've made some logical blunder that really would indicate, if I found the truth about it, that God really does exist after all. I wonder, how could one give up more plainly, cleanly, and conclusively a discussion, a proposition, than has Dr. Matson in that statement? Number 4, of course, there may be some vitiating error in the argumentation of this part. Now, that's in part 3 on evil, pages 135 to 170, in the existence of God. That statement's on page 170. Now, on page 135, Dr. Matson says, there is only one argument that can provide a positive ground for proving that God does not exist. Only one. But then when he gets to the end of that discussion, he says, but after all, this may be all wrong. Now, if you have only one argument, let's look at chart 4L. Chart 4L. Dr. Matson admits defeat in regard to his only argument. Now, he may say a lot of things. I personally, already, though I've known him only a few minutes, have the feeling that if we got to be acquainted well, I would like him a great deal. But he's already, in this brief while he said very little pertinent to the proposition, has admitted defeat in his book and has carried over to it by admission of the affirmation of logical contradiction is an admission of defeat. Matson admits in regard to his argument from evil that there is only one positive argument to prove there is no God. Secondly, that if that one argument will not do it, it cannot be done. Page 135. That one argument will not do it. Page 170. Now look at part 4M. It's an unget-overable dilemma for Professor Matson. In his book, The Existence of God, he admits by implication that the proposition which he assigned for this debate is false. By the proposition he assigned for this debate by implication, he has branded some crucial positions set out in his book, The Existence of God, as false. You see, the proposition he assigned for this debate says, I know God does not exist. I have already given you proof that over and over he admits that he may be wrong about saying that. So he faces this dilemma, to reject his book or to reject his proposition in this debate. And Dr. Matson, you may call for this chart. It's number 4M, and I'd like you to take a pen and check one of these boxes here. Reject either your book or your proposition in this debate. All right, now I want to give, in just a few moments left, some attention to the answers which he gave to the questions which I asked him. Number 1, I, Wallace Matson, know that evil which warrants the deduction that God does not exist is check all appropriate boxes. I had a number of boxes here. Let's put 86A on so the audience can see what we have done here. Now he passes up, note all of these statements in violation. He is leaving us now with the impression that evil has nothing whatever to do with violation of any sort of law. But he answers right down here, something else explained. He says, pointless suffering. I don't think the word violation is appropriate. That's his answer. Actually, this is a doctrine of this question. It is a failure to face up to its significance. There is no atheist, to my mind, that I've ever talked with at all in various universities that I've attended in various capacities, who have ever been willing to say, look, I don't care just what you do, other than the man that I indicated a few moments ago that everything is permitted, though he himself doesn't believe it, just like David Hume didn't really believe his philosophy. No atheist really deep down believes the implications of his doctrine. Now, Dr. Matson, I want to ask you, you have said pointless suffering. Is there then some suffering that has point to it? All right, there is suffering that has point to it. I want him to explain what it is that gives point to suffering. You see, in answering another question, he has said that God cannot inflict any sort of punishment, not even for one moment, not for 1 minute. That would be absolutely pointless suffering. For God to punish a man who has lived his life in willful, blasphemous disobedience. But there is some sort of suffering that has point to it. But all of the evil of the German Nazis in the effort to destroy the Jews was not a violation of any law at all. To my mind, this is one of the most absurd answers that I have ever heard. Now, secondly, let us look at charts 22B, 22C, 22D, 22F, and 22G as we can get to them. Question number 2. I, Wallace Matson, know that the evil which warrants a deduction that God does not exist is. Notice that he checks all. No, we need the chart 22. Yes, right, 22B. I need first, 86A back up there. I want them to see the answer. I'm sorry, I got it away too soon. 86A. Well, let's go ahead with this one then. Now notice he did not check the first point and he did not check the second one. I know that evil which warrants a deduction that God does not exist is. Notice he denies that it is mere subjective evil. Now you see there are some men who say that adultery is wrong, others say it's right. And Dr. Matson says you cannot both be right. There is some sort of objective reference to which you must appeal in order to decide which one of you is right. Now that's going to be very interesting, isn't it? I'm going to be very interested to know just how Dr. Matson is going to fix that. How did Dr. Matson decide that all of these things here are a non-living thing is evil? A boulder rolling down a hill is evil. But a man violating a law is not evil. Isn't that strange? We'll be waiting to hear that explanation. Time, did you say? All right. I invite you now to hear Dr. Matson.